A deal isn't a deal if only one side has to honor it. That was the Iranian ambassador's message to the UN. The 2015 nuclear deal, also known as the JCPOA, is all burden and no benefit.
In practical terms, the JCPOA has become an agreement which is being respected only by one party. Iran has done a lot and much more than its fair share to preserve the nuclear deal. Iran alone cannot, shall not, and will not take all of the burdens anymore to preserve the JCPOA.
But the grievance also came with an ultimatum to the European signatories: stand up to U.S. aggression,
or, along with the U.S., accept the full responsibility for any possible consequences.
One potential consequence, an Iran with weapons-grade enriched uranium. With Tehran recently quadrupling its production of low-enriched uranium, European leaders worry that that's a possibility. Iran's ultimatum comes amid rising tensions between Tehran and the White House. The U.S. accused Iran of attacking 2 oil tankers, which Iran denies, and downing a U.S. drone, which Iran says had invaded its airspace. U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to obliterate Iran, while claiming his ultimate goal is to renegotiate a nuclear deal. Tehran's response: that door has closed.
Well, for more on this story, I'm joined now by our Iran correspondent, Teresa Tropper. Teresa, good to have you in the studio. 1 year after the U.S. pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, Tehran is now bumping up its uranium stockpile. What message is Tehran sending with this move?
Well, as you've said, it's been a year since Donald Trump pulled out of the nuclear agreement, and so far Iran has complied with it, even though it didn't get any benefits from that. And the economic sanctions that were imposed in the past year have really had dramatic effects on the country's economy and also on the people's lives there. So that's why officials in Tehran are now calling it economic warfare. And since the other countries that signed the deal, so the Europeans, China, Russia, were not able to provide relief so far, Iran is now ramping up the pressure and trying to tell them, okay, now you need to act now. And that's why they're stepping across lines of the nuclear deal now, red lines, one at a time.
Okay, they're stepping across this particular line with enriched uranium in a way that is getting a lot of attention. Can we now assume that Iran is working as fast as it can to get nuclear weapons?
Well, that's the big question here, of course. What's sure to say is that they're getting closer to having a nuclear weapon by doing so, because with enriching uranium up to 20% and also by keeping larger quantities of it inside the country, they're getting closer to being able to build a nuclear weapon. But with that uranium enriched to 20%, they can have like a research reactor, for example. But for weapons, they need to enrich it up to 90%. And that's, of course, still a long way to go. And Iran says they don't even want to go there. Foreign Minister Zarif, for example, just reiterated that Iran will never pursue a nuclear weapon because it's against the country's religious beliefs. There's even a fatwa against nuclear weapons in Iran. But of course, not all the countries in the region want to rely on that.
And the U.S. especially doesn't trust those assurances. And the U.S., of course, under President Donald Trump, has pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. Now, what is the U.S. strategy in dealing with Iran?
That's really hard to tell because Donald Trump keeps sending mixed messages, as we've seen in the report. He's threatening the country, but at the same time, he says we could make a new deal. And if making a new deal is what he actually wants, then he's just made a mistake because the latest round of sanctions targets the supreme leader, for example. That's Ali Khamenei, and he's the person who would have to approve fresh talks before they even start. And they also target the foreign minister, Javad Zarif, who's the person who would negotiate on the side of Iran. So that hasn't become more likely. So that's why the supreme leader ruled out fresh negotiations, saying that force is obviously the only language Washington understands.
Okay, the U.S. pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, but there are other signatories as well. Big, important ones, China, Russia, the Europeans. Can they not provide the sanctions relief that Iran is looking for?
That's hard without the US. I mean, the Europeans are trying. They're trying to install a mechanism called INSTEX, which would enable trade between Europe and Iran. But that's not really up and running. They've been trying to do that for a number of months now, and it still isn't working. And it's really hard to circumvent those sanctions without the US because so much internationally is dependent on the dollar and the banking system that's based in the US.
Teresa, thank you very much. DW's Iran correspondent Teresa Tropper.